Marcus Webb had been a photographer for 15 years, but it wasn't until he moved to Riverside Heights that he rediscovered his passion for the ordinary. The quiet neighborhood with its tree-lined streets and century-old brownstones offered a kind of peace he hadn't felt since childhood. After years of chasing war zones and disaster sites for major publications, documenting the mundane felt like therapy. His new project was simple: photograph everyday life in his neighborhood. Children playing in the park, the old man who ran the corner bookstore, morning commuters waiting at the bus stop, the golden hour light filtering through autumn leaves. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just life as it happened. He started on a Tuesday morning in late September, walking down Maple Street with his vintage Leica M6, the film camera that had accompanied him through 12 countries and countless stories. Digital was easier, faster, more forgiving, but film forced you to be intentional. Every shot mattered. The first roll came back from the developer on Friday. Marcus spread the prints across his kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. They were good, better than good. He'd captured Mrs. Henderson feeding pigeons in the square, her weathered hands scattering seeds with practiced grace. The Ramirez twins racing their bikes down the sidewalk, wheels blurred with motion. Tom Chen sweeping the steps of his restaurant, early morning light painting everything gold. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just life as it happened. But there was something in the background of the third photo that made Marcus pause. Behind Mrs. Henderson and her pigeons, barely visible in the shadows beneath the oak tree, stood a figure. A woman in a long coat, her face turned away from the camera. Marcus squinted at the image. He'd been focused on Mrs. Henderson that morning. He hadn't noticed anyone else in the square. The woman was slightly out of focus, almost ethereal, as if she were fading into the shadows themselves. He set the photo aside and continued through the stack. Most were exactly as he remembered them. But then, in a shot of the bus stop, he saw it again. The same woman, or someone very similar, standing at the edge of the frame. This time she was facing the camera, but her features were blurred, indistinct, like she'd moved at the moment of exposure. He told himself it was nothing. Riverside Heights wasn't a ghost town. People lived here, walked these streets. Just because he hadn't consciously registered someone in the moment didn't mean they weren't there. The camera sees everything. The photographer only sees what they're focused on. Still, it bothered him. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus shot 6 more rolls of film. He documented the neighborhood with increasing obsession, rising before dawn to catch the newspaper delivery, staying out past sunset to photograph the streetlights flickering on. He filled notebooks with observations, sketched rough compositions, planned shots days in advance. The photos that came back were extraordinary. He'd found his artistic voice again, that ineffable quality that separated documentation from art. Gallery owners would love this series. He could already imagine the exhibition. Riverside Heights, a portrait in time. But the figures in the backgrounds were becoming more frequent, more vivid. In a photo of the corner bookstore, a man stood in the shop window, watching Marcus through the glass. He wore a suit from another era. The cut looked like the 1950s, maybe earlier. His face was clearer now, no longer blurred by motion. He was middle-aged, with dark hair and hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into the lens. Marcus drove back to the bookstore that afternoon, prints in hand. Tom Chen was arranging a display of local history books in the window. "Tom, do you remember anyone standing in your window when I took this shot about 2 weeks ago, early morning?" Tom studied the photograph, then shook his head. "I was alone that morning. Opened at 7 like always. Didn't have my first customer until almost 9. He tapped the figure in the image. "Nice effect, though. Almost looks like a ghost. Very artistic." "It's not an effect," Marcus said quietly. "He's just there." Tom raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Marcus could see the unspoken question in his eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He spread every photograph from the past 3 weeks across his living room floor, studying them under the harsh light of his desk lamp. The figures were in 17 different shots now, sometimes multiple figures in a single frame. They were always in the background, always slightly separate from the main action, like they existed in a different layer of reality. And he was starting to recognize some of them. The woman in the long coat appeared in 7 photographs, the man in the vintage suit in 4, but there were others now. A teenage girl with a backpack, an elderly man with a cane, a young couple holding hands, each appearing multiple times, growing clearer with each subsequent photograph. Marcus grabbed his laptop and pulled up the digital scans he'd made of all the prints. He zoomed in on the woman's face in the clearest image. Even magnified, her features had a strange quality, like looking at someone through old glass, warped and uncertain. But there was something familiar about the shape of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister, Rachel. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Still alive out there in the suburbs?" Rachel. When was the last time he'd actually seen her? She lived in the city, only 40 minutes away, but their busy lives rarely intersected. They texted, called occasionally, promised to have dinner soon. That dinner never seemed to materialize. He looked back at the photograph, at the woman in the coat, and felt ice water trickle down his spine. It couldn't be. He zoomed in further, the pixels fragmenting into abstract squares of light and shadow. But even distorted, he could see it now. The woman in the coat had Rachel's nose, Rachel's distinctive cheekbone structure. The coat itself, long, dark gray with ornate buttons, he'd seen it before. Rachel had bought it last winter, complained about how expensive it was, then wore it constantly for months. Marcus's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. He pulled up Rachel's contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he say? "Hey sis, I think I've been photographing your ghost. Just checking if you're still alive?" He set the phone down. It was past midnight. He'd call her in the morning, confirm she was fine, and laugh about his paranoid delusions. But he didn't laugh, and sleep remained elusive. Part 2. The pattern emerges. Morning came gray and cold. Marcus had fallen asleep at his desk around 4 a.m., his face pressed against a stack of photographs. He woke with a stiff neck and the certain knowledge that something was fundamentally wrong. He called Rachel. It went to voicemail. He called again 20 minutes later. Voicemail. By noon, he'd called 6 times. He texted, messaged her on 3 different apps, even tried her work number. Nothing. The knot in his stomach had grown into something with
teeth gnawing at his insides. He told himself there were 1,000 innocent explanations. She could have lost her phone, left it at home, been in back-to-back meetings all morning. Rachel was a prosecutor. Her days were often unpredictable, consumed by courtrooms and case preparation. But he couldn't shake the image from the photograph. Rachel, standing in the shadows, watching him take pictures of Mrs. Henderson feeding pigeons. Rachel, who was supposed to be alive and well in the city, not haunting the backgrounds of his suburban photography project. Marcus forced himself to eat something, then grabbed his camera and went out. He needed air, needed to move, needed to do something other than stare.
The Riverside Heights Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the northern edge of the neighborhood. Marcus had walked past it dozens of times, but never gone inside. Now, as he climbed the front steps in the fading evening light, he felt like he was crossing a threshold into something he wouldn't be able to uncross. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer as he entered. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and kind eyes that probably made her excellent at dealing with curious residents seeking information about their historic homes. "We're about to close," she said apologetically, "but you're welcome to come back tomorrow. We open at 10. "Please," Marcus said, and heard the desperation in his own voice. "I need to research disappearances in Riverside Heights, historical ones. It's important." Something in his tone must have convinced her. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, 20 minutes. I'm Louise, by the way." "Marcus, thank you." Louise led him to a back room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of bound volumes. "We have records going back to the neighborhood's founding in 1889. What time period are you interested in?" "All of them," Marcus said. "Anyone who disappeared without explanation, vanished without a trace." Louise's expression shifted, curiosity mixed with concern. "That's an unusual research topic." "I'm a photographer. It's for a project." The lie came easily. What was he supposed to say? "I'm photographing ghosts, and I think my sister is about to become one." "Well," Louise said slowly, "there have been a few. Riverside Heights has a bit of an unusual history in that regard. Hold on." She moved through the filing cabinets with practiced efficiency, pulling folders and setting them on a long table. James Whitmore, 1952. Margaret Ashford, 1976. The Delacroix twins, 1983. David Park, 1991. Emma Cartwright, 2010. There are others going back to the early 1900s, but those are the most well-documented. Marcus's pulse quickened. Emma Cartwright? He hadn't known she'd disappeared here, in Riverside Heights. He'd thought it was the car accident. Emma Cartwright didn't die in a crash. Louise shook her head. Common misconception. She was in a minor accident, fender bender really, but walked away from it. It was 3 days later that she vanished, left her house one morning to walk to school, and never arrived. They found her backpack in Riverside Park. The same park where Marcus had been taking photographs. The same park where Emma's ghost, or whatever she was, had appeared in his images. "What connects them?" Marcus asked, pulling the folders closer. "The disappearances. Is there a pattern?" "If there is, no one's ever figured it out. Different ages, different backgrounds, different decades. The only connection is geography. They all lived in Riverside Heights when they vanished. And there's one other thing. Each disappearance was preceded by sightings." Sightings? People claimed to see the victims in multiple places simultaneously. A neighbor would swear they'd seen Emma on one side of the neighborhood, while her parents insisted she was at home. David Whitmore's wife reported seeing him in the bookstore window hours after he'd left for a business trip. That sort of thing. The police always dismissed it as mistaken identity or grief-induced hallucinations. Marcus felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. How many disappearances total? 17 over the course of 136 years. The earliest was 1889, a woman named Catherine Webb, actually. Any relation? Webb? Marcus's throat had gone dry. "That's my last name." "Oh, well, that's probably just coincidence." But Marcus could see in her face that she didn't believe in coincidences any more than he did at this moment. He spent the next 15 minutes frantically photographing documents with his phone, Louise hovering nearby with increasing anxiety. The case files told similar stories. Ordinary people going about their lives, then beginning to appear in places they shouldn't be, witnessed by multiple credible sources before vanishing entirely. Sometimes their belongings were found. Sometimes they simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only questions and grieving families. Catherine Webb's file was the thickest. Marcus's hands shook as he read through the yellowed newspaper clippings. She'd been a photographer, one of the first women in the region to take up the profession commercially. She'd been documenting Riverside Heights for a historical project when she began reporting strange phenomena. People appearing in her photographs she hadn't seen while shooting. Figures from her past. She'd written letters to the newspaper about it, letters that were dismissed as the ravings of an eccentric artist. Then she'd vanished. Her camera was found in Riverside Park, undamaged, with a roll of film still inside. The film was developed, but the images were gone. The negatives showed only pure white, as if exposed to blinding light. "I need to go," Marcus said abruptly, shoving his phone in his pocket. "Wait," Louise called after him as he headed for the door. "If this is for a project, you should know. There's a local legend. People say the disappearances aren't random. They say Riverside Heights is hungry, that it takes people who see too much, who look too closely at the space between moments. Photographers, and artists and writers, people who observe, who try to capture reality." Louise's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "My predecessor here at the Historical Society, she believed the neighborhood itself was alive somehow, built on something old and strange. She said the missing people weren't really gone. They were stuck between, existing in all moments at once, unable to move forward or back. What happened to her? Louise's expression said everything. Marcus drove home through streets that now felt malevolent. Ordinary houses hiding extraordinary darkness. His mind raced through the implications. Catherine Webb, his ancestor, had been the first. She'd been a photographer who saw too much, and Riverside Heights had taken her. Now, over a century later, another Webb had come here with a camera, started documenting the neighborhood, and the pattern was repeating. But why Rachel? She wasn't a photographer. She wasn't even an artist. Marcus pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a moment, engine cooling. Then he saw it, movement in his living room window. Someone was in his apartment. He grabbed the tire iron from his trunk and approached the building carefully. The front door was unlocked. He must have forgotten to lock it in his rush to get to the Historical Society. He climbed the stairs silently, weapon ready, and pushed open his apartment door. Rachel stood in his living room, surrounded by the photographs scattered across the floor. But this wasn't the Rachel he knew. She was translucent, flickering like a faulty hologram. Her eyes met his, and he saw terror there. "Marcus," she said. Marcus pulled out every photograph again and laid them out in chronological order. The first roll, where the figures were barely visible shadows. The second roll, where they became more distinct. The third, fourth, fifth. Each subsequent batch brought the disappeared into sharper focus. And in the most recent photos, they weren't lurking in backgrounds anymore. They were front and center, staring directly at the camera, at him. They were trying to communicate. Marcus grabbed a magnifying glass and studied the most recent image of Rachel. In the background behind her, barely visible, were other figures. Emma Cartwright, James Whitmore, others he didn't recognize. They were standing in a place that looked like Riverside Heights, but wrong somehow. The colors were off. The angles didn't quite match reality. Like a photograph of a photograph, degraded through multiple generations of copying. And they were all looking at something beyond the frame, something Marcus couldn't see. He needed more photographs, not despite the danger, but because of it. If he was already in the process of vanishing, then he had nothing left to lose. He could use the camera the way Catherine Webb had tried to, not to document what is, but to see what's hidden. Marcus loaded fresh film into the Leica. His hands were steady now, purpose overtaking fear. He would photograph Riverside Heights again, but this time with intention. This time he would try to capture whatever it was that was doing this. He left his apartment at 2 a.m. when the neighborhood was dark and quiet. The street lights cast everything in amber, creating long shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The camera hung around his neck like an anchor. He started at Riverside Park, where Emma's backpack had been found, where Catherine Webb's camera had been discovered. The park looked different at night. The playground equipment cast strange shadows. The oak trees became sentinels. The pond reflected no light at all, just darkness. Marcus raised the camera and began shooting. Not random snapshots, but deliberate compositions, focusing on the spaces between things. The gap between streetlights where darkness pooled, the threshold of the park entrance, the shoreline where land met water, liminal spaces, boundaries. Through the viewfinder, he could see them, the disappeared, more visible now in the darkness. Rachel stood by the pond, her translucent form rippling like water. Emma sat on a swing, moving gently back and forth, though there was no wind. James Whitmore stood beneath an oak tree, his hollow eyes fixed on Marcus. And others, so many others. 17 documented disappearances over 136 years, but Marcus could see dozens of figures. Some were so faded they were barely there, shadows of shadows. How many undocumented disappearances had there been? How many people had vanished from Riverside Heights without anyone noticing the pattern? Marcus kept shooting, using up the entire roll. With each click of the shutter, he felt himself become less solid, less tethered to reality. His hands looked strange in the amber streetlight, not quite translucent yet, but heading that way. The transformation was accelerating. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt oddly calm. This was what photographers did. They went where others couldn't or wouldn't go to bring back truth. If the price of truth was becoming unmoored from reality, then he would pay it. As he loaded his second roll of film, he noticed something new. The disappeared weren't just standing around anymore. They were arranging themselves, forming a pattern. Rachel beckoned to him. Emma pointed toward the center of the park. James Whitmore held up his hand, fingers spread. 5. Then he held up both hands. 10. Then he pointed to the pond. Marcus walked toward the pond, the disappeared parting before him like mist. At the water's edge he could see it now, something beneath the surface, visible only because he was halfway between states himself. The pond wasn't just water. It was a well, descending far deeper than it should, and at the bottom something moved. He raised the camera, pointed it at the pond, and shot. Through the viewfinder, he saw it clearly. The thing at the bottom of the well. It was enormous, organic, but not alive in any way he understood. It looked like a massive root system, or veins, or neural pathways, something that branched and spread beneath the entire neighborhood. And where those branches touched, reality became thin, permeable. This was the heart of Riverside Heights, the thing the neighborhood had been built on, maybe deliberately, maybe accidentally. A feeding system that pulled in observers, people who looked too closely at the boundaries of reality, and trapped them in a state of perpetual observation, forever watching, forever seen, never quite existing. The camera clicked, the film advanced, and Marcus understood. Part 5. The Architecture of Absence. Marcus developed the film in his bathroom that night, morning really, as gray dawn light began filtering through the windows. His hands were definitely translucent now, and he could see the tile through them as he worked. He didn't have much time left. The images that emerged in the developer bath confirmed his suspicions. The thing beneath the pond was visible in every shot, a vast network spreading under the neighborhood like a second root system beneath the trees. And where those branches touched, reality became thin, permeable. This was the heart of Riverside Heights, the thing the neighborhood had been built on, maybe deliberately, maybe accidentally. A feeding system that pulled in observers, people who looked too closely at the boundaries of reality, and trapped them in a state of perpetual observation, forever watching, forever seen, never quite existing. The camera clicked, the film advanced, and Marcus understood. Part 5. The Architecture of Absence. Marcus developed the film in his bathroom that night, morning really, as gray dawn light began filtering through the windows. His hands were definitely translucent now, and he could see the tile through them as he worked. He didn't have much time left. The images that emerged in the developer bath confirmed his suspicions. The thing beneath the pond was visible in every shot, a vast network spreading under the neighborhood like a second root system beneath the trees. And where those branches touched, reality became thin, permeable. This was the heart of Riverside Heights, the thing the neighborhood had been built on, maybe deliberately, maybe accidentally. A feeding system that pulled in observers, people who looked too closely at the boundaries of reality, and trapped them in a state of perpetual observation, forever watching, forever seen, never